There's nothing like growing your own plants inside during the wintertime, and some of the easiest ones you can do have to be paperwhites and amaryllis bulbs. And there's a lot of different house plants that we can grow and enjoy throughout the year, but none of them produce the kind of flowers like amaryllis do, and the flowers and the smell like the paperwhites do. So they're really fun to grow and really easy to do. You don't have to do any special forcing or preparation to get them to bloom. You just pot them up and away they go. So for example, paperwhites, here's a pot that we planted just probably a week ago, and they're already starting to grow. And you can do the paperwhites in gravel like this, or you can do them in soil. It doesn't really matter which way you go. They just will take off, and usually in about 4 to 6 weeks they'll be blooming, and they should get about this tall. They'll be maybe 12 to 18 inches tall. Lots of white flowers on them, and I've got two different varieties, one that's fairly heavily scented and one that's very lightly scented. And so for some people, the heavily scented paperwhites tend to be a little overpowering. So we have a couple different options for you to choose from, and they won't be quite as strong smelling as maybe the ones that you are more familiar with, but very easy to do in a pot like this. So what we can do is we can take just a smaller standard pot. If you're going to do gravel, you want to make sure there's no holes in the bottom of the pot. So we want a pot without drainage if you're going to do the gravel, because we need the water to stand in the gravel. So we would basically have the water touching the bottom of the bulbs so that the roots will grow down into the water. If you're doing soil, you want a pot with drainage and a saucer to control the water, so you don't have them standing in water. So if we were to do our paperwhites in here, I'd pick maybe 3 bulbs. These are nice big bulbs, just getting ready to sprout and take off like crazy. They'll be blooming in, like I said, in about 4 weeks, and we could put three bulbs in there, no problem. I could probably get those in there, and we could do that in soil or in the gravel. Very, very easy to do. And if you're doing soil, make sure you use a good potting soil, something like the Fertilome potting soil. So Fertilome makes an excellent potting soil, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. This is a seed starting mix as well too, a real light, fluffy mix, great to start all kinds of plants in. But if we're going to do an amaryllis, which is I'm going to show you how to plant the amaryllis, we're going to use a little bit heavier potting soil in the seed starting mix. Usually I'll put a little piece of paper towel down on the bottom. Of course, we've got a pot with holes again in the bottom for good drainage. We'll put that down in there so that the soil doesn't fall out through the bottom. And I picked this particular variety. It's called Ferrari. It's a bright red, gorgeous flower. And it's just beautiful. And you want to get as large a bulb as you can. So this is one of our 34 centimeter size bulbs. Nice big bulb. Root system's already getting going, so this is a perfect bulb for planting. I'm going to take the tag off, and what we'll do is down in the bottom of the hole, we're going to put a bunch of down in the bottom of the pot, we're going to put a bunch of potting soil. And this is our Fertilome potting mix. It's a really light, fluffy mix. It doesn't have a lot of bark and twigs and junk in it. It's mostly perlite, a little bit of vermiculite, and peat moss with a little bit of humate in there as well too. So really nice high quality potting mix. We're going to fill most of this pot up with our potting mix, and we'll pack it down just a little bit as well too, to kind of make things work a little bit better for this bulb. I like to put my bulbs in so that they are probably about a third of the way sticking up out of the soil. So I'll kind of press that soil down a little bit so it doesn't settle too much. And it has a fairly good root system, so I'm going to make a little hole down in the bottom so the root system will kind of have a place to go. We don't want to push the bulb down in the soil too hard and damage the root system, because we do have a fairly good root system started here, and we don't want to damage that. And so I'm trying to make a hole that those roots will fit down into without damaging them. So I'm going to kind of hold the bulb up and push the soil down in around the root system to give it a little bit more support. And then we'll take our potting soil and put a little bit more soil in around it. If I don't make a giant mess, we'll be lucky. So fortunately, this soil is really forgiving. We can do a lot with it. And we'll see how that works. Alright, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing, just kind of push that soil in down around the root system so it gives that bulb the support that it needs. It won't tip over, because the bulbs, once they start to bloom, they get very tall. And that should give it good support. with that root system. You can add just a little bit more soil to it, because it's going to settle a little bit as we water the bulb. That soil is going to settle just a little bit, and it'll expose the bulb a little bit more. So we'll put just a little bit more soil in around it. Kind of pack that in just a little bit, and then I've got some fertilizer to fertilize it with that'll keep it happy through the growing season. The amaryllis usually take about 6 to 8 weeks to bloom, and if you plant them just at the right time, you can have them blooming when there's not much going on outside during the winter time. I like to have mine blooming in January and February. It's nice to have them blooming at the holidays, but it's great to have them in January and February when there's not as much going on. So about a teaspoon of Osmocote or Garden Coat 6, nice slow release, long-lasting fertilizer. It'll just gradually feed a little bit every time you water. And at this point, once I get it planted and fertilized, I'll water it thoroughly so that the soil gets well saturated, and then I won't water it a whole lot until I get a flower bud sticking up out of the bulb, probably about 3 inches or so. Then I'll water it weekly at that point. Up to that point, maybe every 10 to 14 days. You don't want to water it too much, but once it really starts to go, then you need to water it probably weekly. If you have a really dry home, you might want to water a little bit more frequently than that if things dry out really quickly. I'll put the tag on there so we remember which kind it is. And here's one that we planted about 2 weeks ago, and it's really coming along. As you can see, it's got a flower bud right here that's just starting to come out, and it's got one that's just about ready to open up and start to bloom. Usually this size of a bulb will have 2 flower stems with 4 to 6 flowers on each stem, and in many cases it'll have 3 flower stems, and so you'll have tons of flowers coming off a bulb this size. So we'll have flowers to enjoy, and more flowers to enjoy later with these nice potted up amaryllis. And it's a lot of fun to grow these indoors and enjoy the blooms that are almost 10 to 12 inches across throughout the winter time.